news! Joe Biden has appointed a new CDC director to replace the last one. Let's hope that this one's not almost exactly the same and behaved really badly during the pandemic, laughing and lying their way through that whole bloody disaster. That is what they're like. Hello there, you 6.5 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on a voyage to truth, freedom, revolution, and mutual awakening. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now so the algorithm gives you what's good for you, rather than giving you another CDC director who's so like the other CDC directors, you might as well not have bothered replacing them in the first place. We did a good story about Rochelle Walensky. She was the last CDC director. This new one, in shocking footage, is revealed laughing, scoffing, and joking about a period of suffering, corruption, lying, and ineptitude in a manner that makes me feel physically sick, for which she'd probably recommend I take mandatory medications and stay in the house for 100 years in case it causes everything to go really wrong. Let's see how the mainstream media announced this fiasco.
President Biden has appointed a new CDC director, Dr. Mandy Cohen.
Cohen was the state's guiding force through much of the COVID-19 pandemic. She stepped down from that role in November 2021 after nearly 5 years on the job.
We already know that people are now questioning openly the validity and effectiveness of masking. So even seeing them march out in their masks and the person doing the signposting taking off their mask is already a reminder of what went on during that era. It was divisive, it was politicized, it was exploited, it was profitable for some pretty dubious institutions. This is going to be a big problem if this subject remains on the agenda, because it is deeply revealing about the way that power behaves, how its bureaucracies operate in conjunction with corporations, how government empowers institutions that use science as a veil for odd behaviours and odd edicts. In particular, many things we were told were scientific were the exact opposite of that. Guesses, hunches, ideas.
Dr. Cohen headed to Washington to meet with both Democratic and Republican lawmakers to talk about public health. She says it's a bipartisan issue. Cohen says she wants to focus on repairing trust, an issue since the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, first, it starts with the whole team at CDC. Trust is not just built with me doing something different. It's all of us being different.
So when they talk about trust and the repair of trust, what do they mean? Emails obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request show that CDC Director Rochelle Walensky and former NIH Director Francis Collins were aware of and discussed breakthrough cases of COVID in January 2021, right when the vaccines became widely available. Just to remind you, what that means is at the point when vaccines were being rolled out as a solution, they knew that people were still contracting COVID when they were vaccinated. I don't know if you remember that time, but I don't recall that being the messaging on mainstream media or from the CDC.
And at my first all-hands meeting here at CDC last week, the first thing we talked about was trust.
Running an important and influential agency like the CDC requires acumen, skill, moxie. Let's see the ability that Mandy Cohen will be bringing to the role by examining her conduct during the pandemic period and how she made her decisions. This footage emerged revealing exactly how she does it.
So I would call, probably the person I called most was the Secretary of Health and Human Services in Massachusetts. She worked for a Republican governor just to, but you know, when she was like, "Are you going to let them have professional football?" And I was like, "Nope." And she's like, "Okay, neither are we." So
just to give you some context for this, it appears that during the pandemic period, decisions like whether or not mass entertainment or sports should continue were determined on the basis of chats with your mates. Are you going to ban the NFL? Yes. So will we then. Follow the science. Follow the science. Do you remember that language? Unfortunately, we have to, based on the data. What many people queried during the time of the pandemic was, what was the science we were following exactly? How was it arrived at? How do you know the efficacy of a lockdown against a virus that you are unfamiliar with? And based on this bit of footage, it's pretty apparent that people in power aren't better than you or cleverer than you. Oh, what are you, a doctor? Do you remember all of that? You're not a doctor. These are doctors. These are medical experts. You need to be a medical expert to go call up your mates and go, "What are you doing? Let's do the same thing," so that none of us are exposed and there's homogeneity of policy so you can't question it.
You know, it was like conversations like that. So, or I'd be like, "So when are you gonna think about lightening up a mess?" They're like, "Next Monday." I'm like, "Okay, next Monday."
They coordinate their policies on the basis of interpersonal relationships and preferences. So it was dishonest to claim that it was science in the first place. Now, if you're talking about a break with the past and re-establishing re-establishing trust. How do you break with the past? By doing what you did in the past. How do you re-establish trust? By behaving in the same way that you've always behaved. How can these institutions modulate, alter and improve their conduct when their conduct requires that they continue to behave in that way? And what I mean by that is presume authority, claim authority, which is sometimes legitimate and sometimes plainly isn't. So whether it was Walensky lying before a congressional hearing about emails and when they had particular bits of information, or Mandy Cohen joking about how these life-altering decisions were made, it seems like there's room for new scrutiny, new analysis, and a requirement for a reckoning that won't take place under the Biden administration, and very few political figures are offering that reckoning. And now it appears that from a hushed-up study from Scotland, that vaccine efficacy itself is being openly questioned on the basis of science. A new report has shed light on the impact of Scotland's intrusive COVID lockdown restrictions and revealed there is no evidence to say they was effective. What are you doing over there, Mandy? Oh, well, we're just gonna shut down football because we feel like it. My friend in Georgia's doing that. All right then, let's shut down the caber tossing. Sorry about that, Scotland. Scots were subject to the strictest restrictions in the UK during the pandemic, partly because Scotland wanted to distance themselves from the then Boris Johnson right-wing libertarian governmental style. So again, it was political rather than scientific. I believe that science was used in the pandemic period in the same way that religion was used in medieval Europe. This is just what's right. God has decreed. Science is being used as unquestionable authority rather than what it's supposed to be. Here is some evidence. Where's the evidence? The Scottish Government's handling of coronavirus is going to be scrutinised by the Scottish COVID inquiry, which commissioned an independent report on the epidemiology of the virus. Written by Dr. Ashley Croft, consultant public health physician and medical epidemiologist, it will form the basis of discussion during the probe. But he has said there was insufficient evidence, or alternatively no evidence, to support the use of face masks outside healthcare settings, lockdown, social distancing and test, trace and isolate measures in 2020. He adds, the evidence base has not changed materially in the intervening 3 years. While in some media spaces you hear people say that the problem was people didn't react quickly enough or they weren't harsh enough, they should have locked down more and locked down quicker, the opposite is true. It was always a guess, and it was a guess that had to be legitimised by the nomenclature of science, not by the methods and efficacy and empiricism of science. In 2020, there was scientific evidence to support the use of some of the physical measures, e.g. frequent hand washing, the use of PPE in hospital settings, adopted against COVID-19. For other measures, e.g. face mask mandates outside of healthcare settings, lockdown, social distancing, etc., there was either insufficient evidence in 2020 to support their use, or alternatively, no evidence. It's been argued that the restrictive measures introduced during the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in individual, societal and economic harm that was avoidable and that should not have occurred. All of the questions we asked about the well-being of our children, the economic impact, mental health of adolescents, health impact elsewhere, mentally, socially, biochemically, people missing heart medicine, cancer appointments, all of those things that were being brought up were all valid, legitimate, and much more scientifically accurate than lock yourself in your house, take this, don't take that, don't go there. The fact is that throughout the pandemic, what could have happened is these are some measures that may work, we're not sure. Here are some medicines that may be effective for certain groups, we're not sure. We're going to have to trust you to make your own decision for yourself and for your loved ones. That's not what happened. People were shamed en masse. People that were celebrated as heroes in the healthcare industry were dispatched and discarded when it was convenient. The whole thing sucks and stinks. And you can see why that happened when you watch this little exchange between Mandy Cohen and her interlocutors. Because it was done in a glib, conversational, well, I just found my friend and they said they were doing this, so I said I'll do that. It was a bunch of guesses by a cohort of buddies, sold as science to support authoritarianism. In Scotland, as in most countries, a wide range of physical measures against COVID-19 were either recommended or else mandated from early 2020 onwards. During August and November 2020, there was little scientific evidence to support the physical measures that were mandated in Scotland against COVID-19. So, if during that time you were thinking, I should be allowed to go out if I want to, I should be able to take this medication if I want to and not have to if I don't want to, you were, it increasingly seems, absolutely right. Those of us that were cynical and sceptical about government motives were right to be. Once you can police the minds of most people, once you've got the majority of the population saying, you should do this, it's shameful, it's disgusting, yes, we should shame them. Once you have stuff like that said on the news, then you've already won the battle. The idea that Mandy Cohen is standing on a mandate of we're going to reintroduce trust or reestablish establish trust is ridiculous. She's part of the problem. Part of the problem is being offered to you as the solution, as is always the case, because the system can't go, well, actually, the system caused this. We're going to have to dismantle the system and introduce new democratic, federalized systems of government based on consensus. They can't do that, because otherwise they won't be able to tax you and take your money and give it to Big Pharma and give it to the weapons industry and have forever wars and keep you doped up and stupefied in your home, hating other people elsewhere in the country because they believe in cultural things that you don't believe in, that are ultimately irrelevant when it comes to the things that truly matter, your freedom. And on vaccines, Dr. Croft added, it remains unclear as to whether or not COVID-19 vaccination has resulted in fewer deaths from COVID-19. That's astonishing. COVID-19 vaccines have been shown in randomized controlled trials to be effective or probably effective in reducing the number of people acquiring COVID-19 or severe COVID-19. However, vaccine-induced protection against COVID-19 is short-lived. So, God, imagine that. What they could say is this will give you a brief window of increased immunity. But have they done the studies on natural immunity? Which big pharma companies go, we're going to invest millions in trialing the efficacy of natural immunity. Therefore, there is no evidence on natural immunity, only anecdotal, conversational, and minor studies taking place, because when we talk about science, we talk about particular types of science at best, and at worst, people saying they're talking about science when what they're actually talking about is a chat they had with some of their friends to establish national policy during a time of pandemic. Re-establish trust? No. Re-establish your doubt. Re-establish your revolutionary fervour. Did you vote for them? I don't remember voting for them. Did you pay your taxes? You had no choice. You have no choice. They don't think you deserve one. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the chat in the comments? We listen to you. We care about you. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at these. They're just as good. Join us every day in the other place where we do a 1-hour show where we talk to experts independently and try to establish community by consensus, not community by control. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe, but more important than any of that, if you can, if they'll allow you, please stay free.